Good morning. This is the Blaine's World webcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, get more information about past shows, future shows, as well at my website, which is behind me, blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield. I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week, we focus on positive news and information by people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce George Pappas, immigration attorney and a longtime friend, for being my guest today. And George, can we wave to all you fans and friends on Facebook? Give everybody, give a big
I'm,
wave.
so, I'm sorry.
Give a big wave to everybody who's watching. Give a big wave to. Okay, that's
Thank
George Pappas. I forgot to mention perhaps the most important thing, George, aside from you being an immigration attorney, is you're also perhaps the area's biggest New York Yankee fan. So we share that in common. So anyway,
Absolutely.
so George, thanks for being my guest today. And George, I know you, but for the folks who don't know you, you grew up as a kid where?
I grew up in New York City, street of Queens.
Okay. As a kid growing up in New York City, did you always know you wanted to be an immigration lawyer?
I wanted to be a lawyer. I remember being in a high school play called You Can't Take It With You. And on the plays program, they asked the actors, what their future plans were. And I put in there, I wanted to be a lawyer. So as far as going back to high school, yeah, I always wanted to be an attorney. So I did it.
But that was, you wanted to be an attorney as opposed to being a baseball player? I find that hard to believe.
Actually, I wanted to be an astronaut first, but I realized that that was a little bit outside my reach. So I settled. I settled for being an attorney, basketball player. Although I played baseball, I never aspired to be a baseball player. So, but it was an attorney. That was my second best option after an astronaut.
Now, your journey was kind of an interesting one, though, because you went to high school, college, the whole bit, but you weren't an attorney right off the bat. Is that correct?
No, I was an import-export trader. After I graduated from university, my background was economics. I dived right into the global paper trading business. I was representing paper mills uh, around the world and importing steamships and rail cars and trucks and supplying printers with all that paper that you see for books and magazines. I did that for almost 20 years.
So what made you decide to go back into law then, or get into law?
Well, even when I was in the paper business, I had this longing to go back to school, and law school was what I wanted to do. And so, even halfway through my paper career, I went back to school at night, studying with the University of London. And it took me about 4 years part-time to get that first law degree. And so I still had a desire to become an attorney. I think what really turned it when I became an adult is when I ran for political office in New Jersey. I ran for council in Camden County, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And that's where I really realized it's really important for me to know the law, statutes, and regulations. And that really crystallized my desire to finally get into a law school. So after I ran for office in the early 90s, I finally took the plunge and started a law degree. And I finally finished around 1998.
So Camden County's loss, though, was the rest of the country's gain because, right, you didn't win that election. Is that correct?
No, I did not win that election. It was close, but I did not win, which was good. It was a silver lining because after the defeat of that election, I ended up going to New York City to resume my career and also to go back to school. So, had I been elected, it would have been really tough for me to go back to school. So, in a way, I'm glad I lost.
And not only that, George, I remember at the time in New Jersey, because I think I told you I was involved in New Jersey. I worked for the court system part-time, and they had a restriction, which I thought was strange. You couldn't also be active in politics. I don't know if it's still the case, but if you were an elected officer, excuse me, in the judiciary, you couldn't be you couldn't do both. So anyway, same thing too. And we're having a little bounce back on the sound. Give me 1 second. Hi, Blaine Greenfield again, and I think we resolved the technical difficulties. It's my pleasure to be speaking with George Pappas, an attorney out of uh, North Carolina. And George, you were telling me that You eventually went back to law school. And then when did you start your own law firm?
Around 2003, I started in North Carolina
Okay. And so what gave you the impetus not only to start the law firm, but how you specialized was kind of interesting. What gave you that impetus?
to start open up my own practice in 2003.
Right. And then to specialize in immigration law.
The immigration came around 2005, 2006. One of the reasons I did it was primarily because you can practice immigration law in any U.S. state as long as you're licensed in one state. So the mobility of the practice was very important to me. You know, I was previously doing family law and criminal law, but I was restricted only to North Carolina. Uh, with immigration, because it's federal law and it's not regulated by the states, it's regulated by Congress. You're allowed to practice this area anywhere in the country. And of course, given the fact that I had to move out of North Carolina, this was very advantageous for me because I could take the practice with me anywhere. So mobility was a big reason. The second reason was having gone through the immigrant experience with my own family in North Carolina, really gave me a desire to get into the practice. And I saw how complex immigration is, which meant that not too many attorneys were really practicing it. And that gave me a bit of a competitive edge to get in there in an area where many attorneys just didn't want to touch it. And so we're going back around 2006 when I made this decision. But mobility from a professional standpoint was a key part of my reason to specialize as much as I could with immigration.
So as an immigration lawyer, what did your practice entail? What did you do?
Well, we started off with representing children that came alone. They were in what we call removal proceedings. I started doing what we call pro bono work in Atlanta. And so I would take these minors with me to court in Atlanta from Charlotte, North Carolina. We'd leave 4 in the morning to go to court. And I brought them to court and I started to practice in that area. Then eventually I moved into helping people with their citizenship, with their green cards, and also with defending them in immigration court to fight against deportation initiatives by the government. And that's how I started. My practice grew after that to include business visas and other visas. So one case at a time, and with each case, it became a new practice area for me within immigration, and my practice began to expand, where by today I've covered everything in immigration.
One of the exciting things I would imagine that you did in your job was when you help people get citizenship. And I remember, remind me of the event, George, but there was once an event I attended at UNCA where you spoke, and then people you would help become citizens were there as well, and they spoke. Do you know the event I'm talking about? It was outside. Um, it's on the athletic field or something. Anyway,
Yes, that the event you're talking about talks about a different part of my career. I published a book called
oh,
The Literary and Legal Genealogy of Native American Dispossession. That's a different part of my career. And the event you're talking about at UNC was when I was discussing the book. And I also held a public lecture at UNC regarding my research. So you just touched upon a different area of my professional background.
well, that area, but this was a different event, George. It was outside at the stadium.
It was
And
outside. Yeah, it was
was it?
outside. It was in the stadium, but that was about my book, not immigration.
Well, we'll talk about the book in just a second as well. So that's another thing you do in your spare time, write this book. But when you help people get their citizenship, that must be a very rewarding thing for you because again, you're not only helping the people, but you're helping their families. And I've seen, the joy that people get when that must be very rewarding for you when you help somebody get their citizenship.
Extremely rewarding. I mean, to bring an individual from an undocumented stage and then finally to citizenship is a remarkable achievement. They're finally able to begin assimilating into our country, our society. They have all the rights and privileges of American citizens, and it just keeps the tradition going of people coming from outside the United States to become US citizens. And as Ronald Reagan has said, one can become an American, but they can't become French, they can't become German, but they can become an American. And so it was a pleasure to introduce people to being citizens and becoming a United States citizens in the euphemism to becoming an American. Probably the proudest thing I could do is get someone to become a U.S. citizen. I mean, that's really a remarkable achievement for them and for me.
Ballpark, do you have any idea how many people you helped become citizens? You ever think about that?
Probably several hundred. I mean, over 20 years, yeah, several hundred would not be unrealistic. That's a lot of people. And
That's
that's just
most.
citizenship. We're not talking about all the other immigrants that I helped in other ways. Um, when I became a judge, my impact was in the thousands, not hundreds, in the thousands.
So you mentioned too, you beat me to the punch, but in addition to doing that, George, you always amaze me because not only were you doing the practice, you were also writing the book, and then also you were teaching, right? Economics.
That's right. We were teaching law. My wife and I, my beautiful bride, Ellen Pappas, and I ran a law school called the International Center for Legal Studies. And we ran that um, teaching institution for 21 years, where we prepared students around the world to prepare for the University of London law exams. So we did that online for 21 years, Blaine.
How did you get into that?
Well, when I was in England, remember, three of my four degrees are from the University of London, plus I did high school in London. I was very familiar with the educational system in the UK. And having been part of a tutorial college, is what they call it in England, I knew what that was. And so I transferred a tutorial institution from being physically on the ground to becoming online. Plus, there were no teaching institutions in the early 2000s preparing students for the University of London law exam. These are students that were not resident in England. They were all over the country, all over the world, rather. London, since 1858, had a distance learning program, and these students were still part of that program. The advent of the online platform finally gave me a way to reach out to these students online. And for 21 years, it worked. That's how I got into it.
That must have been very exciting because at the time, you were kind of ahead of the curve. Online 21 years ago, or
Oh,
even
yeah.
21 years, people weren't doing that. So I can't believe you, George, in terms of doing all this stuff. Plus, you're also, you mentioned you're writing that book, or how many books have you written?
I've written one book. That was a lot of work. That was 10 years in the making. Remember, I was working full time and teaching and researching and writing this book, which was part of my PhD, that later became a book. Yeah, that was 10 years worth of work. This was not a novel that I can crank out in 3 or 4 years. It
Do you
was
see
work.
you see yourself writing another book?
If I get a chance one day to teach, yes. I certainly have a lot of things I'd like to write about beyond Native American dispossession, but you need space where you can do that. And I don't know when I'm going to get that space, but if I get that time, I can produce what I want probably in 2 to 3 years. But again, it's a question of time.
Well, it's interesting because we're talking about time and the future. It segues into what I also want to talk to you a little bit about your experience then as a judge. And again, I think that's a book unto itself. I'd love to read that one. But all of a sudden, George, we were friends, and all of a sudden one day you tell me you're moving. You're not going to be in North Carolina anymore. You're going to you're going to Massachusetts. What was that all about?
Well, I was appointed federal immigration judge back in July of 2023, and I was appointed to preside over at the Boston Immigration Court. When they gave me that news, I said, "You can't be serious, Boston." I said, "Don't you realize I'm a Yankee fan?" And for some reason, they didn't laugh on the other end of the phone. I said, "Okay, it was just a joke." um, but I was very excited about going to Boston, a major metropolis. It was not a B or C lister. This was a major A list market. And so it gave me an opportunity to really um, use my background and my skills in a very high volume immigration court, one of the highest volumes in the United States, plus being in Boston, which is a great city. So that's how I ended up in Boston. The Department of Justice appointed me to go there, and I quickly had to leave North Carolina. They didn't give me much time. I had to wrap up a 20-year law practice in 8 days. That was not pleasant. Um, But I eventually unpacked everything, distributed all my files. Fortunately, I knew other attorneys to help me. Plus, my wife helped me unpack everything. We loaded up a truck and I drove it all the way up to New York. It was not a pleasant experience, but I did it. And I just got back about 2 weeks ago.
Had you ever thought you wanted to be a judge?
I had started thinking about it maybe 4 years ago. Remember, I was an attorney representing clients. I enjoyed that. But I finally reached that 20-year mark where I said, I need to go to a different level. And certainly immigration was moving up the ladder in terms of the political discourse. And I realized that the backlog of cases was growing and growing. And I basically told the Department of Justice, I'm here to help. You guys have a huge problem with the backlog. You need more judges, and I'm here to serve. And so I was able to take it to the next level. And it's probably one of the best things I've ever done in terms of my professional experience. Absolutely.
So you did that then for about 2 years in Boston?
2 years. Yep, two
Yeah.
years.
And all of a sudden, I hear from Georgia, I hear from Ellen that all of a sudden you're going to be moving back to the area. What brought that about?
There's a person called President Trump. Uh, President Trump, after his inauguration, began firing immigration judges in ways that has never occurred before. Uh, he has fired close to well, we had about 700 immigration judges nationwide 7 months ago. We're down to about 600 now. So we've lost about 100 immigration judges. I would say about 70% of those were fired. I was fired in the last round, and no one was fired for cause. Everybody was fired with the same 3 or 4 sentence memo that we got from the director that basically said under Article 2, we no longer need your services. Drop off your equipment at the end of the day. That's it. No thank you, no appreciation for our service, nothing. By the time they got to me, I could see the slow moving train wreck getting closer and closer to my 2 year extension because we were all under what's called a 2 year probationary period. All judges go through that. And after 2 years, normally about 96% of those judges get converted to full time civil servants. Here, under Trump, 52% have been fired. Unheard of, staggering. Judges not only on probation, judges that have been presiding for 9 or 10 years. He just fired another two last week that have been presiding for 3 or 4 years. So it's been a judicial massacre, to say the least, in terms of the attack on the immigration courts, while at the same time, the backlog is growing and growing close to 4 million cases. So that's what's brought me back to North Carolina because I was terminated back on July the 11th. And I can tell you, it's one of the proudest badges of honor that I could possibly wear to have been fired under this administration. This termination notice will be framed in my office, front and center.
What does Article 2 say?
Article 2 gives the Attorney General, the President, the right to terminate executive department employees. That's their argument. Their argument is that under the Constitution, they can fire and hire anybody they want. Legally, that's not true. There's civil service protections. In fact, the government just lost against one of our judges last week, who's been reinstated with back pay, which goes to show you that their legal argument is not very strong. And so we are all fighting it back legally. We are not sitting here accepting what we consider to be an unlawful termination.
So talk about your fight legally. So you're now no longer in Massachusetts, you're back in New Jersey. Fortunately, I guess you were lucky in the sense that you still had a home in New Jersey. So can you imagine, or you lived through it? I guess some folks packed up and left and everything was gone.
It was bad for a lot of judges. All of us relocated from Europe, from Arizona, from Texas, to move up to Boston to be judges. We weren't local. We all had to uproot. I mean, I was gone from my wife for 2 years. I saw her 3 or 4 times over 2 years. Other folks were in the military. They got transferred from Europe. They bought a house in New Hampshire, put their kids in school, and they were fired. 20-year veterans of the Navy. The amount of disruption is just astronomical in terms of the pain that they caused on so many judges that were extremely well qualified, were doing their job. None of us were fired because of our performance. We were fired because of the imputed political bias that they attached to us, Blaine. There's the rub. They attached a political bias on what we were doing before we became judges.
Because even before you became a judge, I think you once told me you became an independent. You weren't a Democrat or Republican, is that correct?
Independent. That I was independent. I was not affiliated with any political party, but I was representing immigrants before U.S. agencies and immigration courts. And this administration considers that a no-no. The fact that I was representing immigrants is seen as a negative by this administration.
So nobody is supposed to represent them,
I represented them because they had remedies under U.S. law.
right?
The U.S. law gave many of my clients an opportunity to remain in the United States under U.S. law. How can you argue with that? I mean, this is what this administration is arguing. This administration wants to destroy the judiciary. Attacking judges is just the tip of the iceberg. He's suing virtually all the federal judges in Maryland. He's come out publicly and stated he doesn't want to wait 200 years to give due process and fair hearings. He wants people deported now. This is our president.
What happens to the workload, George, so that all of a sudden now you get bounced out of Massachusetts? Are they going to replace that slot, or what are they going to do?
Well, eventually they will replace the slots that they fired. At this point, we don't know who they're going to replace them with, but based upon the track record of who they're retaining, they're probably going to replace them with military or law enforcement personnel, not people that were representing immigrants, not people that were private practice attorneys like me. This administration doesn't want lawyers like that working in the government. That's the problem. And that's the dark cloud that overshadows our judicial system. Remember, Congress has abandoned its role as a check on abuse of executive power. The only part of government that's still functioning as a guardrail against abuse of executive power is the judiciary. And the judiciary is under attack as we speak. I'm Exhibit A as proof of that.
So you're now in North Carolina, but you mentioned to me off the air, so the battle or the fight is still continuing. Is that correct? That they're still interested in it?
The battle means that we are explaining to the public what's happening, because the attack on judges, the attack on immigration courts is not an isolated assault. All of our institutions are being assaulted. The media has been assaulted. The Department of Education has been eviscerated. Our aid program has been eviscerated. The Department of State has been eviscerated. 1,500 fired in one sweep. And consulates closing around the world, primarily not to issue any more visas, which is a legal way of entering the United States. The Environmental Protection Agency is being eviscerated. The organizations that run our weather systems are being attacked. I can't think of any institution that is avoided being attacked by this institution. The glue, the cohesion that keeps us together as a country is under assault, not just the rule of law. Of course, civil liberties of U.S. citizens are now being assaulted. U.S. citizens are being arrested without probable cause. They're being picked up off the street. We're not talking about immigrants. We're talking about U.S. citizens. Every citizen should be afraid of what's going on. They cannot be silent because the alarm bells are going off now. This is no longer an abstract fear. This is a fear that's on the ground. You have troops in Washington, D.C., taking over the district. You have troops ready to go into Chicago and New York. If you don't think that's an assault on our way of life, I can't think of anything else. So we're in a crisis situation, Blaine, and our battle as judges who've been fired is to get the word out and to help people realize that this is not just an attack on judges, it's an attack on our way of life. That's the message we're trying to connect with our public. We're trying to let them know that there's threats that affect everybody, not just immigrants, not just judges, not just courts. So we got a real crisis on our hands right now.
And part of the problem, George, as you're speaking, is that it's happening in so many different areas. As we speak, the Fed is being attacked. And they're trying to replace people on the Fed. And it's just, wow, it's like a lot of areas are being attacked. And, how do you mount up a protest on this? Or how do you get people interested? I guess having you speak about this issue is one way. Um, where do you see this where do you see this going, George?
If the current power structure remains in place, um, you will see the military take over many of the judicial branches of government. The military. You will see not only has Congress passed $170 billion legislation to fund the Department of Homeland Security, they're funding enforcement. They are attacking the judiciary. So you're not going to have justice. You're going to have a, a military structure for enforcement. In other words, you're going to have an authoritarian state solidify over time. That's called fascism, Blaine. We are in the stages of an emerging fascist government, and it's happening before everybody's eyes, in plain sight. This is not a backroom deal. I think if the military goes into Chicago and New York, we're going to have some real problems. But what's also happening here is that these are manufactured events, manufactured crises to deflect attention from the real issues that are affecting Americans: jobs, education, health. I mean, over 15 million people are going to lose health care based upon that last bill that was passed. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are going to lose access to food stamps that they're entitled to. So the average person who voted for this regime is going to feel the pain. They're going to realize it's now affecting them, not somebody else that they thought was going to be affected. The tariffs are going to eviscerate inflation as we get into October, November, December. If you go into the supermarket now and you look at the price of meat, it's through the roof. It's just starting. The impact of the tariffs is just starting. So the assault on our domestic economy, the assault on our civil liberties, the assault on our education, the evisceration of our relations with foreign nations is under attack. The Ukrainian situation shows how little backbone this government has shown in defending democracy where it counts right now. Ukrainian lives are being killed. They're fighting for our democracy and our freedom, and we're having a hard time promoting them. We're giving more benefit of the doubt to Russia than we are to the victims of the invasion. These absurdities are in the face of our country right now. If people can't see this, we've got a problem. And if they can't see it, we have a problem. Unfortunately, 77 million people voted for this government, and now we are reaping the results of that election, and the results are not very pretty.
And you're going to see it happening. I mean, next time we have a hurricane, FEMA, that getting rid of FEMA, just incredible. George, what do you recommend if people are watching or listening? What do you recommend they should be doing?
Well, if they sit home, they might as well just leave the country because they're not helping us. If they're sitting on their iPhone just scrolling, they're not helping us. They have got to get out and talk to their neighbors about what's happening. They have to be engaged with community groups. They have to realize something else. They have to embrace all people in their community, not just U.S. citizens, other people who pay taxes, who have families, who have children, who obey laws while they're living here. They are part of our community. The community has to come together, challenge politicians, get out the vote, speak to the press. Don't accept the narratives that are being siloed to everybody. If the community grassroots can come together and talk to other communities across the country, we have got a chance. But if you sit home, couch surf, this country is doomed. And we have to fight for our education. We can't let education be defunded. Without education, there's no future. So people need to be actively engaged in their communities with groups, whether community groups, political parties. They have to get out there and voice their concerns and recognize what the crisis is. I mean, North Carolina, we went through a hurricane. We were promised funding after after he was inaugurated. He brought down Chuck Edwards on Air Force One, made a speech to Western North Carolina. I'm here to save you. He cut the funding. He cut the funding to a region of the country that was eviscerated. People can't stand for that. Our taxpayer dollars are there to help us during a crisis. The states are not in a position to help their people in a crisis. Texas is an example. They couldn't do it on their own without FEMA. So people have to get off the couch. They got to get off their iPhone and get out into the community, speak to each other, form policies, protest, speak, write to the press. Don't sit home. Now is the time to become engaged, not disengaged.
Good advice, George. Let me ask you one other question in terms of an update on what you're doing. So you're back now in North Carolina, had a very successful practice as an immigration lawyer. You told me off the air, are you planning to restart that?
Yeah, I'll be starting my firm in about 2 weeks. The firm is called Pappas Legal, PLLC. We just filed papers yesterday. Most likely, I'll have my office based out of Asheville, and I will go back into the area of representing people in immigration court and helping them become citizens. I will continue what I was doing before, and I will be engaged with the community, not just practicing law. This is not the time to just sit in your silo and just do that. So while I am starting my law practice, I will also be engaged with the community wherever I can, both locally, regionally, and nationally. So I will be doing that.
And so if people want to reach you, what's going to be the best bet?
At this moment, because we're not fully set up, just through email right now, attorney.gpappas@gmail.com. And hopefully in a week or two, we'll have a website and a phone number up because we're just putting the foundations together. But I can be reached at attorney.gpappas@gmail.com.
Okay. And they can also reach you, said, for immigration questions, especially or immigration advice. So you're already doing that now. You're already practicing, or you will be practicing immigration law again?
I'm not going to be practicing for another 2 weeks until the law firm is set up. So everything's paused right now. I'm not entertaining any new clients until that firm is set up. Once it's set up, the door will be open.
Okay. And so when you went to the when you went to the judgeship, so you had to drop all that, you can maintain it, you can maintain the practice any longer?
Yes, I had to close my 20-year law practice to become a judge. I paid a big price to do this. I had to close my practice. I had to refer my clients to other attorneys that I worked with. That was not an easy thing to do. I had to legally shut off my practice because you can't be a federal judge and have a practice. You're not allowed to do that. So, and that's what I did. I said, I'm willing to do that. Now that I'm no longer a judge, this is why I have to restart the practice and file it and file its papers to become a legal entity because I had closed the practice before.
Okay. Well, anyway, just an incredible story, George. Thank you for sharing it with
My pleasure.
people watching this. And in a crazy way, I'm glad to have you back because I missed you for 2 years, but good to see you again. And
Good to see you.
hopefully our paths will cross sometime in the near future, my friend. Be well.
Thank you, Blaine. Thank you. My pleasure.
And thanks also to my producer, Cappy Fassetti, for arranging today's show. And we'll see you soon, buddy. Thanks.
Thank you.